The death of King Edward the Confessor in 1066 would change Anglo-Saxon England forever. Edward the Confessor died without having any children, and so 4 men came forward to claim the throne. Edgar the Atheling was a young relative of Edward. Harold Hardrada's late father was the last Viking king of England. Harold Godwinson's sister was the widow of Edward. And finally, William, Duke of Normandy, claimed that Edward had promised him the throne on a visit to Normandy. The Witan, which essentially is an Anglo-Saxon council, chose Harold Godwinson as the new king. Harold Hardrada was angered by this and invaded England from the north. It was Tostig Godwinson, Harold Godwinson's brother, who had convinced him to invade. Harold Godwinson marched his men to York to meet Harold Hardrada. The Battle of Fulford Gate was fought over the River Ouse. The Vikings won and York surrendered. Hardrada and his men took around 150 hostages from York and delivered them to Stamford Bridge, where him and his men rested, without their armour on. Haraldsford, his army, and housecarls, which are highly trained soldiers, marched to Stamford Bridge and attacked the Vikings. On the actual bridge there was a lone Viking who managed to kill about 40 Anglo-Saxons until one of them went under the bridge and rammed a spear up his back passage. The remaining Anglo-Saxons charged Hardrada and his men, completely outnumbering them. Tostig Godwinson was killed. Then Harold Hardrada was killed with an arrow to the throat, allegedly. Very soon after, William, Duke of Normandy, sailed his army to Pevensey, touching down on English land. The story goes that William fell while getting off the boat, face-planting the beach, which would have been seen as a bad omen, though William saved it. He grabbed a handful of sand, stood up, and proclaimed, "England is already in my grasp." This was on September 28, 1066. William and his men very quickly built a castle, having brought the materials with them. Castles are fortified structures which the Anglo-Saxons did not have many of, as they instead had burhs, which were essentially towns surrounded by a large wall and sometimes a ditch or motte on the outside of the wall. Harold Godwinson, after hearing about the arrival of the Normans, marched his men south, meeting William and his men in Hastings. The Anglo-Saxons had the high ground initially. They were on the top of a hill, and the Normans were at the bottom of it. It's worth noting that Harold Godwinson had about 3,000 men left at a push, who were tired after marching the entire length of the country twice and fighting 2 battles. William had about 5,000 to 7,000 men, including archers and cavalry, which the Anglo-Saxons were not experienced in. However, the Anglo-Saxons had circular shields, which they made a shield wall with, so the Normans' arrows couldn't touch them. The Normans' horses also could not get up the hill. The Anglo-Saxons started coming down the hill with their shield wall and were taking out Normans. After a few hours, rumours of William's death spread and it looked like the Anglo-Saxons were winning. Then William lifted his helmet and shouted to the men that he was not dead. William had multiple horses killed from underneath him, yet he was able to remain relatively unharmed. The Norman army was well trained and were far more tactical than the Anglo-Saxon army, which was largely made up of regular farmers who used their tools for weapons. The Normans used a tactic called the feigned retreat, where they turned around and ran away, making it look like to the Anglo-Saxons that they were fleeing. When the Anglo-Saxons ran after them, breaking their shield wall, the Normans then ran behind them and slaughtered them. According to the Bayeux Tapestry, a tapestry made by Anglo-Saxon women under Norman rule, Harold Godwinson was killed by an arrow in the eye. This is disputed though, as being blinded was believed to be a sign that God has rejected you, so it's possible that the Normans fabricated this to prove a point. What we do know to be true though is that Harold's body was so badly injured that the only way his wife could identify his body was due to the large birthmark he had on his torso. William, Duke of Normandy, then became William the Conqueror, King of England. The Battle of Hastings lasted for about 8 hours in total, which is far longer than battles usually were, with them averaging about 2 to 3 hours. If you want to see a video on how the Normans ruled England until William's death in 1087, let me know in the comments. If you're interested in joining my Discord server or following my social media accounts, all the links are in the description.